The fastest way to make a stranger protect you is to give him a reason not to walk away. Audrey Simmons didn't know that rule existed until the night it saved her life. Rain drifted through the open edges of the elevated subway platform in Brooklyn, turning the concrete slick and silver beneath the fluorescent lights. It was a little after midnight. Most people had already gone home. The city wasn't asleep, but it had become quieter, lonelier, as if New York itself had pulled its coat tighter against the cold. Audrey stood near the yellow safety line, clutching the strap of her canvas bag. The train was 7 minutes away. 7 minutes felt longer when she realized the same 3 men had followed her through 2 stations. At first she told herself it was coincidence. New Yorkers shared trains all the time, shared sidewalks, shared silence. But coincidences didn't keep glancing in her direction. Coincidences didn't step off one train and follow someone onto another. She lowered her eyes and checked the dark reflection in the station window. They were still there, not close enough to cause a scene, just close enough to make her heartbeat stumble. The cold air caught in her lungs. Audrey worked with struggling families every day. She wasn't the type to panic. She talked people through crises for a living. But something about the way those men moved made every instinct inside her whisper the same warning. Leave now. Unfortunately, there was nowhere to go. The stairwell behind her was empty. The street above would be worse. The platform stretched nearly 200 feet in either direction with nowhere to hide. Then she saw him, a man standing alone near one of the steel support columns. Tall, dark overcoat, hands in his pockets. Motionless despite the rain drifting through the station. He looked completely out of place and completely at home at the same time, like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Audrey noticed something else. Nobody stood near him. The few commuters on the platform unconsciously kept their distance. She didn't know why. She only knew she was running out of options. One of the men behind her started walking forward. Not quickly, deliberately. Audrey's pulse slammed against her ribs. The digital board overhead flashed 6 minutes until arrival. Too long, way too long. Her eyes returned to the stranger. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't smart. It was pure survival. Audrey crossed the platform before she could talk herself out of it. Her shoes splashed through puddles. Her breath came fast. The stranger turned slightly as she approached. Sharp green eyes met hers. Calm eyes, dangerous eyes, but not the eyes of someone hunting her. Before fear could steal her courage, Audrey grabbed his arm with both hands. Dad. The word escaped before she could stop it. Her voice cracked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Dad, thank God, I've been looking everywhere for you. Silence settled over the platform. Audrey immediately regretted everything. The man looked down at her hands, gripping his sleeve. His expression never changed. For one terrible second she thought he might pull away, ask if she was insane, walk off and leave her standing there. Instead, something almost unreadable flickered across his face. Then he lifted one hand and rested it gently on her shoulder. Sweetheart, he said smoothly, as if they'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times. I've been looking for you too. Audrey nearly forgot how to breathe. The performance was perfect, effortless, real. The man shifted slightly, placing himself between her and the rest of the platform. Not aggressively, not obviously, just enough. Audrey glanced over his shoulder. The men had stopped moving. One exchange had replaced confidence. The stranger's voice remained calm. Everything okay? To anyone listening, he sounded like a concerned father. Audrey swallowed hard. Not really. His gaze drifted past her toward the 3 men. He seemed to notice them for the first time. What she didn't know was that the atmosphere on the platform had already changed. Less than 30 feet away, one of the men quietly stepped back. Another reached for his phone. The stranger noticed both movements. Audrey didn't. She was too focused on slowing her breathing. The distant rumble of an approaching train echoed through the darkness ahead. Wind rushed through the tunnel. The man finally looked back at her. Good, he said quietly. Audrey blinked. Good? The corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Because now I know exactly who followed you here. The train lights appeared in the distance, and for the first time that night, Audrey realized the stranger she had called Dad might be far more dangerous than the people she was trying to escape. The train screamed into the station on a rush of wind and steel, scattering rainwater across the platform. Audrey stayed frozen beside the stranger for half a second longer than necessary. Every survival instinct told her to get on the train and disappear. Another instinct, quieter but stronger, told her that disappearing was no longer an option. The 3 men had already made that clear. The stranger glanced toward the arriving cars, then back toward the far end of the platform, where the men had been standing. They were gone, not vanished, just smart enough to retreat before drawing attention. "Come on," he said. His voice remained calm, controlled, the kind of voice that made people listen without realizing they were listening. Audrey followed him into the train. The doors closed seconds later with a mechanical thud. As the city blurred past outside the windows, she finally released a breath she had been holding for what felt like an hour. Several passengers sat scattered throughout the car, a nurse finishing a late shift, a man asleep in a business suit, a teenager staring at his phone, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Audrey suddenly wanted nothing more than to be one of them. She sat across from the stranger and studied him for the first time, mid-30s, dark hair, expensive coat, a face that belonged equally in a boardroom or on the cover of a magazine. Nothing about him looked reckless. Nothing about him explained why 3 grown men had immediately backed away after seeing him. "You can stop pretending now," she said quietly. His expression did not change. Pretending, the father act. For the first time, a faint hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. "I thought I was doing a pretty convincing job." Audrey almost laughed despite herself. "Almost. You were terrifyingly convincing." The train rattled through a tunnel. Light flickered across the windows. The stranger leaned back slightly. "Good." Audrey folded her arms. "Who are you?" He looked out the window instead of answering. Someone who disliked seeing people followed home. It was not an answer. She knew it. He knew it. Yet something about the way he said it made her hesitate before pushing further. Silence settled between them, not awkward, careful, measured. Then his phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen. The change was almost invisible, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tiny shift in posture. "But bad news?" she asked. Possibly. He slipped the phone away. "What is your name?" Audrey hesitated. Giving her name suddenly felt important. Dangerous. "Audrey." The stranger nodded once. "Nice to meet you, Audrey." That is not how normal introductions work. Another faint trace of amusement crossed his face. "No? Usually the other person gives their name too." The train emerged from underground. City lights flashed across the glass like streaks of gold and white paint. He studied her for a moment before finally speaking. "Gabriel." Audrey repeated it silently. "Gabriel." Somehow the name fit. Strong. Impossible to read. "Well, Gabriel," she said carefully. "Thank you." He looked genuinely surprised by that. "For what?" Most people would have walked away. His gaze drifted toward the dark city outside. Most people would not have called a complete stranger Dad. Audrey felt heat rise into her cheeks. Fair point. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then the train began slowing. Gabriel's phone vibrated again. This time he answered immediately. He listened for 3 seconds. Nothing more. The calm expression disappeared, not replaced by anger, replaced by focus. The difference was somehow more unsettling. He ended the call and stood. "We are getting off here." Audrey blinked. "This is not my stop." "I know. Then why are we getting off?" Gabriel looked directly at her. "Because the black SUV waiting outside has been following this train since the last station." Audrey's stomach dropped. The doors slid open. Cold air flooded into the car. Around them, passengers continued their routines, completely unaware that anything was wrong. Gabriel extended a hand toward her, not demanding, simply offering a choice. "Trust me for 5 more minutes," he said. Audrey stared at the hand, then at the station beyond the doors, then back at him. What she did not know was that less than a mile away, someone was already searching security footage from the subway platform, and Audrey Simmons had just become far more important than she could possibly imagine. Audrey took Gabriel's hand before fear could change her mind. The station floor vibrated beneath her shoes as the train pulled away behind them. Cold air rushed through the open platform. For a moment she wondered whether she had made a terrible mistake. Following a stranger into the night was not something responsible people did. Yet nothing about this night felt normal anymore. Gabriel led her through the station exit with calm, unhurried steps. That calmness unsettled her almost as much as the men who had followed her. Outside, rain misted across the empty street. Headlights reflected on wet pavement. A black SUV waited at the curb. Audrey immediately recognized it from Gabriel's warning. The vehicle sat across the street with its engine running. 2 silhouettes occupied the front seats. They were watching the station entrance, watching for her. Her stomach tightened. "You were right," she whispered. Gabriel barely glanced in their direction. "I usually am." Before she could respond, a yellow taxi turned the corner. Gabriel opened the rear door and motioned for her to get inside. Audrey hesitated only briefly before sliding onto the seat. Gabriel entered beside her. The taxi pulled away almost immediately. The SUV remained parked for several seconds before merging into traffic. Audrey watched through the rear window as it followed. They are still behind us. I know. The driver glanced at them in the mirror but wisely stayed silent. Rain tapped against the glass. The city passed in streaks of color. Audrey folded her hands together to stop them from shaking. Can you tell me what is happening? Gabriel studied the traffic outside. I am trying to figure that out myself. You seem unusually calm for someone being followed. A faint smile, unusually observant. Audrey leaned back. The answer frustrated her. Every answer he gave felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing half its pieces. 10 minutes later, the taxi stopped outside a 24-hour restaurant near the East River. Neon lights glowed red and blue against the rain. The place looked ordinary, that was probably the point. Inside, warm air carried the scent of coffee and grilled onions. Only a handful of customers occupied the booths, a truck driver drinking black coffee, 2 college students sharing fries, an elderly couple quietly eating pie. Ordinary people, ordinary conversations. Audrey felt her pulse begin to slow for the first time all night. Gabriel chose a booth near the back wall where he could see both entrances. Audrey noticed that detail immediately. They sat across from each other. A waitress arrived with menus. Gabriel ordered coffee. Audrey ordered tea. Between them lasted until the waitress disappeared. Then Audrey spoke first. You knew that SUV would be outside. Gabriel looked at her. I suspected. Why? He reached for the coffee cup when it arrived. Steam curled upward between them. Because people who follow others rarely quit after one failed attempt. Audrey stared at him. You talk like you have experience with that. Gabriel did not answer. The silence itself felt like an answer. Across the restaurant, a television mounted above the counter played muted local news. Rainstorms, traffic delays, sports highlights, normal life continuing without them. Audrey envied everyone in the room. Then something caught her attention. A man entered through the front door. He wore a dark jacket and carried an umbrella. Nothing unusual, except he did not order food. He did not sit down. He simply scanned the room. His gaze paused briefly on Audrey before moving on. The feeling returned immediately. The same feeling she had experienced on the subway platform. Being watched. The man left less than 30 seconds later. Audrey's pulse quickened. Did you see him? Gabriel nodded once. Yes. Who was he? Someone looking for confirmation, Audrey swallowed. Gabriel placed his coffee cup down carefully. His expression remained calm, but something colder appeared behind his eyes. That you are worth following. Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. Outside the restaurant window, a pair of headlights slowed near the curb. Gabriel noticed them at the exact same moment she did. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. For the first time since meeting him, the color left his face. Not fear, recognition. The message contained only a photograph taken 6 months earlier. Audrey stood beside a homeless man outside a church shelter in Brooklyn, smiling as she handed him a winter coat. Gabriel stared at the image for several seconds before looking up at her. And suddenly he understood that whatever danger had found Audrey Simmons tonight had started long before she ever stepped onto that subway platform. Some secrets did not arrive with a warning. They arrived as a photograph on a phone screen at 1 o'clock in the morning. Audrey stared at Gabriel from across the booth. The warm light above them suddenly felt colder. Outside, rain continued sliding down the restaurant windows in silver ribbons. Inside, the world remained ordinary. Coffee cups clinked. A waitress refilled sugar containers. A couple argued quietly about directions, yet none of it felt real anymore. What is that picture? Audrey asked. Something I need to verify. It is a picture of me. I know. His answer carried the same calm certainty that seemed to follow him everywhere. Audrey leaned forward. Then maybe you should tell me why someone has photographs of me. For a moment, Gabriel said nothing. The silence stretched between them. Not hostile, careful. Like a man deciding how much truth another person could handle. Finally he stood. We are leaving. Audrey let out a frustrated breath. That is becoming a habit. Tonight is not normal. I noticed. 20 minutes later, the city skyline faded behind rain-streaked windows as a black sedan moved through quiet streets in Manhattan. Audrey sat in the rear seat beside Gabriel. She had stopped asking where they were going. Every answer seemed to create more questions. The vehicle eventually turned onto a tree-lined street hidden from most traffic. Old brick townhouses stood shoulder to shoulder beneath glowing street lamps. The neighborhood looked expensive, private, and impossibly quiet. The sedan stopped in front of a narrow building with dark iron railings and polished stone steps. Gabriel stepped out first. Audrey followed. Rain tapped softly against her coat. The townhouse rose 4 stories above them, elegant and intimidating at the same time. Nothing about it felt temporary. Nothing about it felt like a place strangers visited. "Whose house is this?" she asked. Gabriel looked toward the upper windows. "Mine." Audrey stopped walking. "Of course it is." The front door opened before they reached it. A grey-haired woman stood inside. She looked to be in her 60s. Sharp eyes, warm expression, the kind of person who seemed capable of reading an entire room in seconds. "You are late," she told Gabriel. Then her attention shifted to Audrey. "And you must be Audrey." Audrey blinked. "How do you know my name?" The woman smiled gently. "Because Gabriel has spent the last hour refusing to explain why half of New York seems interested in finding you." Audrey looked toward Gabriel. He offered no defense. Inside, the townhouse felt surprisingly warm. Soft lighting illuminated bookshelves, artwork and polished wood floors. The air carried the scent of tea and cedar. It felt less like a fortress than she expected, more like a home. The grey-haired woman introduced herself as Maria and disappeared toward the kitchen. Audrey followed Gabriel into a large study overlooking the street. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls. Rain streaked across the tall windows. For the first time all night they were alone. Gabriel removed his coat and placed it across a chair. Audrey immediately noticed something strange. A file folder sat on the desk. Her name was written across the front. Every muscle in her body tightened. "Why is there a file with my name on it?" Gabriel's expression hardened. Not with anger, with realization. He looked at the folder as though seeing it for the first time. Audrey crossed the room before he could stop her. Her fingers closed around the folder. Inside were photographs, dates, not hundreds of pages, just enough to make her pulse race. She recognized her apartment building, her workplace, the church shelter where she volunteered. Some entries stretched back 6 months. Audrey slowly lifted her eyes toward Gabriel. Gabriel stepped closer and examined the pages. His jaw tightened. "I have never seen this file before." Audrey laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "That answer would be more convincing if your name was not on the front door." Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside the study, silence settled heavily between them. Then Gabriel reached the final page. His expression changed instantly. The calm disappeared. He stared at a single photograph clipped to the back of the file. Audrey followed his gaze. The image showed her standing outside the church shelter 6 months earlier beside the homeless man she had helped during a snowstorm. Written beneath the picture was a sentence that made the room suddenly feel 10 degrees colder. "Subject established contact with community witness." The sentence beneath the photograph seemed impossible to ignore. Audrey stared at the page while rain traced slow paths down the study windows. "Subject established contact with primary witness." The words felt clinical, deliberate, written by someone who had been watching for a very long time. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. Gabriel did not answer immediately. He continued studying the photograph as if it belonged to a puzzle he had never expected to see again. The homeless man stood beside Audrey in the picture, wrapped in the winter coat she had given him. Snow covered the sidewalk. The shelter's red brick wall rose behind them. To Audrey, it looked like an ordinary memory. To Gabriel, it clearly meant something else. "Gabriel." Her voice sharpened. "What does it mean?" He finally looked up. "It means the man you helped may not have been who you thought he was." Audrey folded her arms. "He was homeless. Maybe." The answer sent a chill through her. Maria entered, carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. The older woman immediately sensed the tension in the room. Her eyes moved from Audrey to the file on the desk, then to Gabriel. "You found it." Gabriel nodded once. Maria placed the tray down carefully. "That is not good." Audrey almost laughed. "I am glad someone else noticed." Maria sat beside her and gently poured tea into a porcelain cup. "Tell me about the man in the photograph." Audrey looked back at the image. "His name was Henry. At least that is what he told me." The memory returned surprisingly clearly. A freezing January, grey skies. Henry sitting outside the church shelter with worn gloves and tired eyes. "He never asked for money," Audrey continued. "He mostly sat alone. He read old newspapers. Sometimes he helped clean around the shelter." Gabriel listened without interrupting. Audrey shook her head. "No. Did anyone ever visit him? Not that I saw." Gabriel exchanged a look with Maria. It lasted only a second, but Audrey noticed. Another silent conversation she was not part of. "You know something," she said. Maria sighed softly. "We know enough to be concerned." Audrey stood from the chair. Frustration finally broke through the fear. "Everyone keeps saying that. Concerned, careful, dangerous. Nobody actually explains anything." Thunder echoed somewhere over Manhattan, the room briefly illuminated with pale blue light. Gabriel rose from his chair. "You deserve answers." Audrey waited. "Then give them to me." He walked toward the bookshelf and removed a small leather notebook. Dust clung to its edges. The pages looked decades old. Gabriel opened it carefully and turned several pages before placing it on the desk. Audrey stepped closer. A list of names filled the paper in neat handwriting. Most meant nothing to her. Henry Walker. Her eyes widened. That is him. Gabriel nodded. I thought it might be. Audrey looked back at the notebook. Why is his name here? Gabriel closed the cover slowly. Because this notebook belonged to my father. Silence settled over the room. Audrey stared at him. For the first time since they met, Gabriel seemed genuinely uncertain. Not afraid, not guarded, uncertain. Your father knew Henry? She asked. Apparently. Audrey sat back down. Her mind raced through possibilities. None of them made sense. A homeless man from a church shelter somehow connected to Gabriel's father. A file documenting her life for 6 months. Strangers following her through the city. Every answer created 2 more questions. Outside, rain continued falling against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the sleeping city. Then Gabriel's phone rang. He answered immediately. Audrey watched his expression change with every passing second. Whatever he heard made the room feel smaller. More urgent. When the call ended, Maria stood. What happened? Gabriel lowered the phone. The shelter is closed tonight. Audrey frowned. Because of the weather? Gabriel slowly shook his head. No. His gaze moved toward the photograph still lying on the desk. Because Henry Walker disappeared 3 days ago. By 2 o'clock in the morning, sleep felt like something that belonged to other people. Audrey sat beside the tall study window, watching rain blur the city lights into streaks of gold and white. Henry Walker had disappeared 3 days earlier. The information refused to leave her mind. A man she had known only through brief conversations and shared cups of coffee at a church shelter was suddenly connected to surveillance files, missing records, and Gabriel's family history. None of it made sense. Maria eventually brought her a blanket and another cup of tea before retreating upstairs. The townhouse had grown quiet. Only the ticking of an antique clock and the distant hum of traffic drifted through the rooms. Gabriel stood across the study, examining the contents of the file again, page after page, photograph after photograph, looking for something he had missed. Audrey finally broke the silence. What if Henry was not important? Gabriel looked up. You do not believe that? No, she sighed. Gabriel closed the folder. People do not spend 6 months tracking a social worker because she gave away a winter coat. Audrey stared at the rain beyond the glass. Deep down, she already knew he was right. Her phone suddenly vibrated on the table beside her. The sound made both of them look down immediately. Audrey frowned. That is strange. What is it? Unknown number. Gabriel stepped closer. Do not answer. The phone vibrated again. Then a text message appeared on the screen. Audrey's stomach tightened. There was no greeting, no explanation. Only an address in Lower Manhattan, followed by a timestamp from 12 years earlier. Beneath it appeared a single sentence. Ask about your father. The room became very twice, then 3 times. Her heartbeat accelerated. This is not funny. Gabriel took the phone and examined it carefully. Who knows this number? Almost nobody. Anyone from the shelter? No. Gabriel immediately dialed another number. He spoke quietly for less than a minute before ending the call. Can you trace it? Audrey asked. Not yet. He looked back at the address displayed on her screen. Something about it clearly caught his attention. Do you recognize that location? Audrey shook her head. Should I? Gabriel walked toward a bookshelf and pulled out a city map from a drawer. He unfolded it across the desk. His finger moved across several streets before stopping. The expression on his face changed again. Not shock, recognition. What? Audrey asked. Gabriel looked at her carefully. That address used to be an archive facility. For what? Financial records. Audrey frowned. Why would someone send me there? Before Gabriel could answer, another vibration echoed from the phone. A second message appeared. This one contained a photograph. Audrey immediately leaned forward. The image was old and slightly faded. 2 men stood together outside a brick building. One of them was younger than Gabriel, but unmistakably related to him, the same posture, the same calm intensity. The second man caused Audrey's breath to catch. She had seen that face before, every year, every birthday. Every framed photograph her mother kept in the hallway, her younger, smiling, standing beside Gabriel's father. Audrey felt the room tilt slightly beneath her. For several seconds she could not speak, neither could Gabriel. Rain tapped against the windows. The clock continued ticking. Somewhere far below, a taxi horn echoed through the sleeping city. Finally, Audrey whispered the only words she could manage. They knew each other. Gabriel stared at the photograph. Apparently they did. Then his phone rang. He answered instantly. Audrey watched as the color slowly disappeared from his face. When the call ended, Gabriel remained silent for a moment. "What happened?" she asked. His eyes lifted toward hers. "The archive facility from the message burned down 12 years ago." Audrey swallowed. "Then why send us there?" Gabriel looked back at the photograph. "Because whoever sent this wants us to find something that survived. Some discoveries changed a person's future. Others quietly rewrote the past." Dawn had not yet arrived when Gabriel and Audrey left the townhouse. Rain still hung over Manhattan, softer now, drifting through empty streets beneath pale streetlights. The city looked suspended between night and morning. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. The photograph remained on Audrey's phone screen. Her father standing beside Gabriel's father, smiling, comfortable, familiar. 12 years of unanswered questions suddenly felt heavier than ever. The archive facility had once stood near the waterfront. Now only a fenced construction lot remained. Steel beams rose from concrete foundations where the old building had been demolished years earlier. The sedan stopped across the street. Audrey stepped out first. Cold air immediately wrapped around her. The East River rolled quietly in the distance beneath a blanket of fog. "There is nothing here," she said. Gabriel remained focused on the construction site. "Maybe that is why someone expected us to leave." Audrey followed his gaze. A small brick structure sat behind the main lot near the river, easy to miss, older than everything around it. "What is that?" she asked. Gabriel studied it for several seconds. "Records annex." Together they crossed the street. The building looked abandoned. Dust covered the windows. Rust stained the metal door. Yet when Gabriel pushed against it, the lock gave way surprisingly easily. Someone had been there recently. The smell inside carried traces of damp paper and old wood. Audrey's footsteps echoed through narrow aisles filled with broken shelving. Most of the records were gone. Boxes sat overturned across the floor. Water stains stretched across the ceiling. It looked as though someone had searched the place years ago. Then searched it again. Sunlight had not yet reached the windows, leaving the room trapped in grey shadows. Audrey moved slowly between the shelves. Her flashlight swept across faded labels and damaged files, financial statements, property records, insurance claims. Thousands of forgotten pieces of other people's lives. Then she stopped. A small metal cabinet stood alone near the back wall. Unlike everything else, it remained locked. Gabriel crouched beside it, his expression immediately sharpened. This cabinet was installed after the fire. Audrey frowned. "How can you tell?" The manufacturer did not exist 12 years ago. For the first time all morning, hope appeared in his voice. The lock was electronic but dead. After several minutes of careful work, the cabinet clicked open. Inside sat only one folder. Audrey stared at it. The folder looked ordinary. Beige cardboard, black marker. A single name written across the front. Daniel Simmons, her father. The air seemed to leave her lungs. Gabriel slowly handed it to her. Audrey's fingers trembled as she opened the cover. Photographs, reports, newspaper clippings, pages filled with handwritten notes. Her eyes moved rapidly across the documents. Then she froze. A photograph had slipped loose from the folder. It showed her father standing beside Gabriel's father on a dock near the river. The date in the corner matched 22 years earlier. Audrey stared at the image. Beneath it, someone had written a sentence in blue ink. "If anything happens to me, protect my family." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Audrey looked up at Gabriel. His eyes had not left the photograph. "My father wrote that," he said quietly. Audrey swallowed hard. "How do you know?" Gabriel pointed to the handlife. Outside, the first faint light of morning began touching the river. Inside the annex, something shifted between them. Not romance, not trust alone, something deeper. A connection neither had known existed. His expression immediately changed. Audrey saw it happen, the realization, the shock, the answer he had not expected to find. Slowly, he lifted the document and looked at her. "Audrey," he said, "your father did not just know my father." He placed the page into her hands. Across the top of the document appeared a title stamped in faded ink, Witness Protection Transfer Authorization, and directly beneath it, her father's signature. The document felt heavier than paper should have felt. Audrey stood motionless inside the dim records annex, while pale morning light slowly crept through the dusty windows. Witness Protection Transfer Authorization. Her father's signature sat at the bottom of the page like a ghost reaching across 12 years. She read it again, then again. The words never changed. The reality did. Every story she had built around his disappearance suddenly began to crack. "My mother told me he worked in finance," she said quietly. "She said he traveled, She said one day he never came home. Gabriel remained beside her, studying the other pages in the folder. Maybe that was the version she believed, or the version she was told. Audrey lowered herself onto an old wooden crate. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned another page. Reports, dates, locations, names she had never seen before. Most were redacted. Entire sections had been blacked out. Yet one thing appeared repeatedly throughout the file. Her father's name, Gabriel's father's name, and a third name that neither of them recognized. "Who is Victor Hale?" Audrey asked. Gabriel's eyes narrowed immediately. "I do not know." The answer surprised her. Up until now, Gabriel always seemed to know more than everyone else. For the first time, they were standing in the same darkness. Audrey continued reading. The file described a financial investigation that had taken place more than 20 years earlier. Not a criminal empire, not a conspiracy, just a group of powerful businessmen hiding enormous amounts of money through shell companies and fake charities. Her father had apparently become a key witness. Gabriel's father had helped him disappear before testimony could be given. Audrey looked up slowly. "Your father protected mine." Gabriel nodded. "It appears that way." She stared at the photograph again. The two men looked younger than she had ever imagined, hopeful, unaware of everything waiting ahead. Outside, a ferry horn echoed across the river. The sound drifted through the annex like a memory. "Why would someone keep all of this hidden?" Audrey asked. Gabriel did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward the vital section of the folder. A sealed envelope rested at the very bottom, yellowed with age, unopened. Audrey's name was written across the front in faded blue ink. Her breath caught instantly. That cannot be real. Gabriel carefully handed it to her. Only one way to find out. The envelope crackled softly beneath her fingers. She hesitated. 12 years of questions sat on one side of that seal. Answers waited on the other. Finally, she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The handwriting matched her father's signature. Audrey immediately recognized it from old birthday cards stored in a box at her apartment. Her eyes moved across the page to Audrey. "If you are reading this, then something went wrong." The world seemed to narrow around those words. She continued reading silently. Her father described fear, not for himself, for his family. He wrote about people who valued money more than truth. He wrote about trusting only a handful of friends, and near the end he wrote something that made Audrey stop breathing altogether. "If anything happens to me, find the Romano family. They are the only people I trust to protect you." Audrey slowly lowered the letter. The room had become perfectly still. Gabriel looked at her. She looked back at him. Neither spoke for several seconds. They did not need to. The answer sat between them. Her father had trusted Gabriel's family with her life before she was old enough to remember, before either of them understood why. Then Gabriel noticed something written beneath the final signature, a small line Audrey had almost missed. His expression darkened instantly. "What is it?" she asked. Gabriel pointed toward the bottom of the page. There, squeezed into the margin, her father had added one final sentence. "If Henry Walker ever contacts you, it means they finally found me." The sentence at the bottom of the letter followed Audrey long after they left the records annex. By mid-morning, the rain had finally stopped. Thin bands of sunlight slipped through the clouds above the river, painting the city in pale gold, yet nothing felt brighter. "If Henry Walker ever contacts you, it means they finally found me." Audrey sat in the passenger seat as the sedan moved through lower Manhattan. The folded letter rested in her lap. She had read it so many times that she could nearly recite every word from memory. For 12 years she had believed her father abandoned his family. Then she believed he had died. Now she was discovering something far more complicated. He had been hiding, protecting them, waiting for a danger she never knew existed. Gabriel drove in silence, not the distant silence he wore when thinking through problems. This one felt heavier, personal. The city moved around them, delivery trucks, commuters, street vendors opening umbrellas over food carts. Normal life continuing while Audrey's understanding of her own history collapsed and rebuilt itself piece by piece. Finally she spoke. "You knew." Gabriel glanced toward her briefly. "Knew what?" "That my father mattered." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I suspected there was a connection." Audrey stared out the window. "You did not tell me." "Because I did not know enough." The answer frustrated her, yet deep down she understood it. Every major discovery so far had arrived incomplete. Half-truths hidden inside larger mysteries. They crossed into Brooklyn shortly before noon. Instead of returning to the townhouse, Gabriel parked near a small waterfront park overlooking the harbor. The air smelled faintly of salt and concrete. Seagulls drifted above the water. Audrey stepped out and walked toward the railing. The wind tugged gently at her hair. For several minutes Gabriel joined her. My father never talked about those years. Audrey looked toward the harbour. Why? Because something happened that changed everything. His voice remained steady, but she heard something beneath it. Regret. When I was 13, I asked him why he kept an old photograph in his desk. Audrey turned toward him. The same photograph? Gabriel nodded. The one with your father. He stared out across the water. He told me some debts can never be repaid. At the time I thought he was talking about money. Audrey lowered her eyes to the letter. He was not, no. Silence settled between them again. Comfortable this time. Not because the mystery was solved. Because they finally stood on the same side of it. Then Gabriel's phone vibrated. He checked the screen immediately. Audrey watched his expression sharpen. What happened? She asked. Someone found Henry. Her heart jumped. Where? Gabriel looked at the message. Queens. Less than 40 minutes later, they arrived outside a small church near an aging residential neighborhood. The building stood between a grocery store and a laundromat. Nothing about it looked important. Yet the moment Audrey saw it, recognition flashed through her. I know this place. Gabriel looked toward her. You have been here, Audrey nodded slowly. Once. About 6 months ago. The same day she met Henry. The same day the photograph in the file had been taken. Inside, the church smelled of candle wax and old wood. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, scattering colors across the floor. Near the front pews stood an elderly priest speaking quietly with another man. Audrey froze. She recognized him immediately. Henry looked thinner than before, older somehow, but it was him. The moment Henry saw Audrey, relief flooded his face, then his eyes moved past her and landed on Gabriel. Every trace of relief vanished. The old man took a slow step backward. No, he whispered. It is happening again. Audrey felt her pulse quicken. Henry, what are you talking about? The old man looked directly at her. His voice trembled. Your father tried to warn them, and now the wrong people know you are asking questions. The church suddenly felt smaller. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting shifting colors across the wooden floor, but none of it softened the fear in Henry Walker's eyes. Audrey stood frozen a few feet away. For months she had believed the old man was simply someone who needed help. Now every answer seemed to lead back to him. Henry, she said carefully, what do you mean the wrong people know I am asking questions? The old man glanced toward the entrance before looking back at her. His shoulders sagged as though he had been carrying the same burden for decades. Your father was a good man, he said quietly. Too good for the world he found himself trapped in. Gabriel remained silent beside her, watching, listening. Henry's gaze shifted toward him. You look just like your father. Gabriel did not react outwardly, but Audrey noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. Henry nodded slowly. I hoped I would never have to say any of this. He reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket and removed a small key attached to a faded blue ribbon. The metal looked old, scratched, frequently handled. He placed it carefully into Audrey's hand. Your father gave me that 22 years ago. Audrey stared at the key. What does it open? Henry looked toward the stained glass window behind the altar, the last place he ever expected anyone to search. Silence settled over the church. Outside, distant traffic drifted through the city. Inside, Audrey closed her fingers around the key. Why did he give it to you? Henry smiled sadly. Because I owed him my life. Gabriel finally spoke. What happened? Henry lowered himself onto a pew. For the first time he seemed, emotionally, like a man reaching the end of a very long journey. 22 years ago I worked as an accountant. Nothing exciting, nothing important. Then I discovered records that were never supposed to exist. Audrey sat across from him. The financial investigation, Henry nodded. Your father found them first. I confirmed they were real. His eyes drifted toward the church ceiling. There were people moving money through charities, foundations, companies that existed only on paper, powerful people, respectable people. Audrey remembered the name from the file, Victor Hale. Henry's expression darkened immediately. Yes. The name seemed to carry weight even now. Your father was preparing to testify. Audrey felt her heart beating harder. Then what happened? Henry looked directly at her. Someone warned Hale. The church grew silent again. Gabriel exchanged a glance with Audrey. Neither spoke. Henry continued. After that everything changed. Witnesses disappeared. Records vanished. People stopped talking. He rubbed his hands together slowly. Your father knew he would become a target. Audrey swallowed. That is why he went into hiding. Henry nodded. And because he was trying to protect you. The words hit harder than she expected. For years she had carried quiet resentment. Questions that never received answers. Yet every new truth pointed in the opposite direction. Her father had not walked away. He had sacrificed everything. Your father helped make that possible. Gabriel remained motionless. Did they succeed? Henry smiled sadly for a while. Then the old man reached into another pocket and removed a folded photograph. He handed it to Audrey. Her breath caught immediately. The image showed her father standing beside a storage unit door somewhere outside the city. Written on the back was an address and a date from 12 years earlier, the exact week he disappeared. Audrey turned the photograph over. A second line had been written beneath the address. If this reaches Audrey, tell her the truth is waiting where the river meets the tracks. Henry slowly stood. That storage unit still exists. Gabriel immediately understood something Audrey did not. His expression sharpened. The river meets the tracks. Henry nodded once. There is something hidden there. Audrey looked between them. What? Henry's eyes filled with regret. The last message your father ever left behind. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared completely. Sunlight reflected off the East River in sheets of gold as the sedan followed an aging industrial road along the waterfront. Audrey sat quietly in the passenger seat, the photograph resting in her lap. The address on the back had led them here, a forgotten section of Brooklyn where abandoned warehouses stood beside railroad tracks that no longer carried passengers. The river met the tracks exactly as her father had written. For 12 years the clue had waited in silence. Now it was finally being heard. The storage facility appeared at the end of the road. Rows of metal doors stretched beneath faded security lights. Most units looked untouched for years. The manager's office sat empty. A handwritten sign on the window announced reduced weekend hours. Everything felt ordinary. That was what made it unsettling. Audrey stepped out of the car and looked across the property. Wind moved through the nearby grass. Somewhere a train horn echoed from far across the harbor. Gabriel walked beside her, carrying the old key Henry had protected for more than 2 decades. Unit 47, he said after checking the records they had obtained from the office. Audrey nodded. Neither spoke again until they reached it. The door stood near the back fence facing the river. Rust stained the metal edges. Dust covered the lock, yet the number remained clearly visible, 47. Gabriel inserted the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lock turned with a soft click. Audrey felt her pulse quicken. The metal door rolled upward, slowly. The unit contained almost nothing. One folding chair, a small wooden table, several cardboard boxes, no treasure, no dramatic secret. Just the remains of a life interrupted. Audrey entered first. Dust floated through beams of afternoon light. The air smelled faintly of paper and time. Every object looked exactly where someone had left it years earlier. She opened the nearest box. Family photographs. Old receipts, newspapers, normal things, human things, evidence that her father had once existed beyond the mystery that now surrounded him. Then Gabriel noticed something beneath the table. A small locked case, black, weathered, portable. Audrey immediately recognized the same handwriting from the letter. Daniel Simmons, her breath caught. Together they placed the case on the table. Inside rested a portable video recorder and several storage drives. Gabriel carefully connected the recorder to a small battery pack he retrieved from the vehicle. For several seconds nothing happened. Then the screen flickered to life. Audrey's heart nearly stopped. Her father appeared on the display, older than the photographs. Tired, but alive, very alive. He sat in a small room facing the camera. Behind him stood a single lamp and a plain wall. The recording date appeared in the corner, 12 years ago. Audrey slowly lowered herself into the folding chair. She could not look away. If you were watching this, her father began, then someone finally found the trail I left behind. His voice sounded exactly as she remembered. The years disappeared instantly. Birthdays, bedtime stories, laughter, all of it rushed back at once. Tears filled Audrey's eyes, but she never looked away from the screen. Audrey, if you found this, I need you to understand something. I never left because I wanted to. I left because I was running out of ways to keep you safe. Gabriel stood quietly near the entrance. Giving her space, the recording continued. There was one man who learned what I knew, one man who protected the people responsible after everything should have ended. Audrey leaned forward. The room seemed to disappear around her. Her father's expression hardened. His name is Victor Hale, but he was never the real danger. Audrey froze. Gabriel's eyes narrowed immediately. On the screen, Daniel Simmons reached toward the camera and held up a photograph. The real danger was the person who helped him hide the truth, the person nobody ever suspected. The image came into focus. Audrey stared at it. Gabriel stared at it. And for the first time since this journey began, both of them understood that the enemy they had been searching for had been standing much closer than either of them ever imagined. The photograph on the screen remained frozen after the recording stopped. Dust drifted through the storage unit in the late afternoon sunlight. Audrey could hear the distant sound of freight trains crossing the harbor. Everything else felt silent. The face in the photograph was familiar, not because she knew the man personally, but because she had seen his name repeatedly throughout the investigation, charity boards, financial reports, public events, a respected businessman. Someone who had spent decades standing close enough to Victor Hale to appear trustworthy while never drawing attention to himself. Audrey slowly sat back in the folding chair. "That is impossible," she whispered. Gabriel stared at the image. His expression had become unreadable. "No," his voice was calm, too calm. "It explains everything." Audrey looked at him. "You know who he is?" Gabriel nodded. "Everyone in this city knows who he is." The realization settled heavily between them. For 22 years, the wrong man had occupied the spotlight while someone else quietly protected the entire operation from the shadows. Audrey looked back at the recorder. Her father had known. He had discovered the truth and hidden it where only she could eventually find it. Because he wanted the truth to survive, Gabriel carefully removed the storage drives from the case. "We need to secure these." Audrey stood. "And then what?" He looked at her. "Then we finish what your father started." The drive back into Manhattan happened beneath a sky painted orange and gold by the setting sun. For the first time since they met, Audrey did not feel like a passenger being carried through someone else's story. She understood her place now. The questions that had haunted her for years were finally becoming answers. Yet another realization stayed with her. Her father had trusted the Romano family more than anyone else. Not because they were powerful, because they had kept their promise. At the townhouse, Maria was waiting in the study. The moment she saw the expression on Gabriel's face, she understood that something had changed. The storage drives were connected to a secure system. One by one, old files appeared on the screen. Financial records, meeting schedules, correspondence. None of it was dramatic. None of it needed to be. The evidence was clear. Patterns emerged, transfers linked together, names repeated across decades. The story assembled itself piece by piece. By midnight, the truth no longer looked like a mystery. It looked like a map. Audrey sat beside Gabriel as the final document loaded. She noticed something she had never seen before: exhaustion, not weakness, just the weight of carrying responsibility for too long. "You should rest," she said quietly. Gabriel almost smiled. "That sounds familiar." Audrey looked down at the letter from her father resting beside the keyboard. "He spent years protecting me." Her voice softened. "And somehow you ended up doing the same thing." Gabriel did not answer immediately. Outside, city lights shimmered against the dark windows. Finally he spoke. "Your father protected my family first." Audrey turned toward him. "That debt was never yours." Gabriel's gaze remained on the screen. "Maybe not." Then he looked directly at her. "But protecting you became my choice." The room fell silent. No dramatic declaration, just a simple truth. Audrey felt something shift inside her. The fear that had followed her since that subway platform no longer felt quite as heavy. Before either of them could say more, Maria entered carrying a printed report. Her expression was serious. "The files are already attracting attention." Gabriel stood immediately. "How?" "Because someone else is looking for them." Maria placed the report on the desk. Audrey leaned forward. A search request had been submitted less than an hour earlier. The same storage unit, the same evidence, the same names. Someone knew the truth had been found. Gabriel read the report once, then a second time. Finally, he looked toward Audrey. The final confrontation was no longer a possibility waiting somewhere in the future. It had already begun. The city woke up to the truth 3 days later. Not through rumors, not through anonymous accusations, through documents, verified records, archived communications, financial trails that stretched across 2 decades, everything Daniel Simmons had protected, everything Henry Walker had survived long enough to preserve, everything hidden inside the storage drives. Audrey watched the morning news from the townhouse study as sunlight poured through the tall windows. Reporters stood outside federal buildings, analysts discussed investigations, commentators repeated the same names again and again. The powerful businessman her father had exposed could no longer hide behind respectability. The evidence had become impossible to ignore. Across the city, old secrets were finally meeting daylight. Yet Audrey found herself looking not at the television, but at the letter resting on the desk beside her. The edges were worn now from being handled so many times. Her father's handwriting no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a conversation that had simply taken longer than expected. The study door opened quietly. Gabriel stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. The tension that had followed him since the night they met seemed lighter somehow. Not gone, just different, less burden, more peace. He handed her a cup. "You should eat something." Audrey smiled faintly. Gabriel sat across from her. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath a clear blue sky. For the first time in days, neither of them had anywhere urgent to be. No clues to chase, no missing files, no unanswered questions, just silence. Comfortable silence, the kind that only arrived after a storm had passed. Audrey looked toward him. "Do you ever think about how ridiculous this started?" A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Constantly. I called a complete stranger my father." "You seemed very convincing." Audrey laughed softly. The sound surprised her. It felt unfamiliar after everything that had happened. "I was terrified." Gabriel nodded. "I know." Another quiet moment settled between them. Then Audrey reached for the letter. Gabriel's gaze lowered to the page. "He trusted my father, and your father kept that promise." Gabriel looked out the window. Sunlight reflected across the glass. "He tried." Audrey shook her head gently. "No, he succeeded." Gabriel did not answer immediately. Some truths were difficult to accept even when they were kind. Later that afternoon they left the townhouse and crossed the city together. No security teams, no investigations, no destination connected to the past. Just a simple train ride. Audrey recognized the station immediately. The same platform, the same yellow safety line, the same stretch of concrete where everything had begun. Only now it looked different. Morning sunlight filled the space where rain and shadows had once lived. Commuters moved around them carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Ordinary lives, ordinary moments. Audrey stepped closer to the edge of the platform and watched a train disappear into the distance. "I used to think being strong meant handling everything alone," she said quietly. Gabriel stood beside her. "And now," Audrey smiled, "now I think it means knowing when to trust someone." The announcement for the next train echoed overhead. Wind rushed through the tunnel, familiar, almost comforting. Gabriel looked toward her. "Audrey," she turned. "Yes?" For a moment he seemed to search for the right words. Then he stopped searching. "You do not have to face the future alone either." Audrey felt her chest tighten, not from fear, from relief. Real relief, the kind she had spent years chasing without realizing it. The train arrived with a rush of air and sunlight. Doors opened, people stepped off, others stepped on. Life continuing exactly as it always had. Audrey slipped. There was no into danger, no performance, no reason to pretend. Just a choice. The train doors closed. The city moved forward. And standing on the same platform where she had once called a stranger dad to survive, Audrey finally realized she had found something far more valuable than answers. She had found home.